Margaret Hollowell sank to the ground, the gritty earth pressing into her knees as she rested her head against the cold granite of her father's grave. She was all alone in the world, with no kin, no roof over her head, and not a single man who would give her a second glance. The crumpled letter she carried promised a husband deep in the mountains, a cowboy so tough that no bride had ever managed to stick it out with him. 7 women had made the trip. 7 women had fled back down. But Maggie was through with being run off. She was tired of being tossed aside like yesterday's news. If that mountain was her end, then she'd meet it on her own 2 feet. If you want to see if Maggie can tame that wild mountain cowboy, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Be sure to watch clear to the end and leave a comment letting me know what town you're tuning in from. I'm mighty curious to see how far this tale will go. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons.
The man driving the stagecoach pulled back on the reins, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the trail's dust. He twisted around slowly, his eyes falling on the large woman sitting by herself in the back. Her hands were clutched around a scuffed-up carpet bag as if it contained her entire life's possessions, which it did. "This is your last chance to turn back, ma'am," Hank Beaumont said, pushing his beat-up hat back on his head. "I've brought 7 brides up this path, and I've taken every single one of them back down. Some were crying, some were hollering, and one was nearly out of her wits." Maggie Hollowell stared straight ahead, her expression firm. "Well then, I suppose you can save yourself the trouble of a return journey, Mr. Beaumont, because I am not coming back down." Hank rubbed his stubbled chin, sizing her up. She sure wasn't what you'd call delicate, with her wide shoulders and sturdy hips. Her hands were calloused from a lifetime of scrubbing floors and kneading dough for other folks. She wore a simple gray cotton dress with mended elbows, and her bonnet had seen far better seasons. But her eyes, good Lord, her eyes held a fire that Hank had never seen in any of the others. "You've heard the talk about him, haven't you?" Hank insisted. "They say Caleb Drummond ain't right in the head. The war did something to him. He doesn't speak much, he never cracks a smile, and he sure as sunrise doesn't want a wife, even if he thinks he does right up until one arrives." Maggie's jaw set like stone. "I'm well acquainted with what broken looks like, Mr. Beaumont. I've been broken for as long as I can remember. The only difference is, nobody ever thought I was worth putting back together." That quieted Hank right down. He'd been driving coaches for 20 years and had heard all sorts of bold declarations from all kinds of women. But this one, she meant every word. He could feel it in her voice. The same way you feel the rumble of thunder long before the storm hits. It was low, determined, and on its way, whether you were ready or not. He snapped the reins. The horses strained forward, starting their climb up the rough mountain trail. Maggie held onto the seat as the coach bounced and shook over stones and ruts. Her stomach was in knots, but it wasn't because of the bumpy ride. She took out the letter from her pocket, the very one that had set her on this path. She had read it so many times that the paper was getting thin along the folds. "Looking for a wife. Must be of strong stock. Expect mountain life, hard labor, no frills. If you can handle that, write back." That was the whole message. No flowery words, no mention of love or affection, just a promise of survival. Maggie had held on to that letter for 3 whole days before she finally sent a reply. It wasn't because she was afraid, but because for the first time in her 32 years, somebody was actually looking for a woman who was strong. Back in Ohio, strength was the very last quality anyone wanted in Margaret Hollowell. She could still hear her brother's voice rattling in her head like a pebble in an empty can. "You are just too much, Maggie. Too big, too outspoken, too headstrong. No man is ever going to want you, and I can't be expected to feed a mouth that nobody else will take." He had told her that while standing in the doorframe of the farmhouse their father had built from the ground up, the same house her brother sold just 3 weeks later to cover his gambling losses. He had thrown her belongings into a flour sack and left it on the porch for her, like it was garbage waiting for pickup. She had stood there in the pouring rain, clutching that sack, and made a solemn vow to herself. She would never again have to ask a man for a place to live. If she had to carve a home for herself out of solid rock with her bare hands, then that is what she would do. And so there she was, ascending a mountain in Colorado to become the wife of a man everybody said was cursed. The coach hit a bump that sent a hard jolt through the frame. Maggie steadied herself and peered out the small window. The trees were starting to get sparse. The air up here had a different feel to it. It was hot, dry, and heavy with the smell of pine and dirt. Summertime in the high country was not a gentle season. It was unforgiving. The sun beat down with more intensity, the wind had a meaner edge, and the quiet was so vast it felt like it could swallow a person up. "There it is," Hank announced, bringing the horses to a halt. "That's his spread." Maggie climbed down from the coach. Her boots landed on the hard, dry ground. Up ahead, a man was leaning against a split-rail fence. His arms were crossed over his chest, and a rifle was propped against his hip. It was Caleb Drummond. The stories she had heard about him were true, every last one of them. He was a giant of a man, taller than anyone she had ever laid eyes on, with shoulders so broad they could fill a doorway. His beard was wild and dark, with streaks of silver running through it. A nasty scar snaked its way from his left temple down to his jaw, looking as if someone had tried to cleave his face in two and almost succeeded. His shirt was darkened with sweat, and his sleeves were rolled up past forearms that were thick with muscle and dotted with old wounds. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, a pale, cold gray that could chill a person right to the bone. He didn't budge, didn't say a word. He just stared at her the way a predator watches its prey, judging her, weighing her, and likely already dismissing her as not worth the trouble. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to get back on that coach, but every painful memory reminded her that she had nothing to go back to. She pulled her shoulders back, clutched her carpet bag tighter, and marched directly toward him. "Well now," she said, stopping about 3 feet away from him. "Are you planning to stand there and scowl all day, or are you going to lend a hand with my luggage? Because I didn't spend 6 days on a bouncing coach just to be sized up like a head of cattle." Behind her, Maggie heard Hank make a choking sound. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He looked her up and down, slow and careful, like a man inspecting a horse he was thinking about buying. His eyes settled on her sturdy arms, her wide hips, and her work-worn hands. "You're a bigger woman than I was expecting," he stated, his voice flat. "I'm not about to apologize for it," Maggie said, lifting her chin. "And you're a good deal ruder than I was expecting. So I reckon we're both a little disappointed." For just a second, something shifted in those icy eyes. It wasn't warmth, not by a long shot, but it was surprise. The kind a man gets when something he thought was weak turns around and shows its teeth. He reached down and scooped up her bag with one hand as if it weighed nothing at all. Then he turned and started up the trail to the cabin without saying another word. Maggie took a deep breath and followed him. Behind them, Hank just slowly shook his head. "Lord have mercy on that woman," he mumbled to himself, turning the horses to head back down the mountain. "She'll be running back here before the week is out." But Hank Beaumont was dead wrong. He just didn't realize it yet. The cabin was situated in a small clearing at the very top of the ridge. Caleb shoved the door open and went inside without a second glance. Maggie followed him in and froze. The inside was precisely what she had imagined for a man who had spent too much time by himself. It was stark, rugged, and completely devoid of any sign that a woman had ever been there. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough-hewn wooden table with a single chair stood in the center of the room. One chair, not two, just one. She placed her bonnet on the table and turned to look at him. One chair. He was already taking a knife from its sheath and sitting on a stool near the fire. "I never had a need for another one." "Well, you have a need now." He glanced up, and their gazes met and held. Maggie did not look away. "I will sleep on the floor," he said, indicating the simple bed in the corner with a jerk of his chin. "The bed is yours. You will handle the cooking, the mending, and keeping the fire going. I will do the hunting and the chopping. I will keep any trouble away. Those are the terms. Those are the terms, Maggie echoed slowly, letting the words sink in. This was not a marriage. It was a business deal. Call it whatever you want. I call it a lonely way to live, she answered right back. And I did not travel all this way for lonely. I had my fill of that back where I came from. Caleb's jaw was tight. He went back to his knife, the blade making a hissing sound against the wet stone. The others didn't make it a week. Most were gone in 3 days. Well, I ain't the others. That's what they all say. Maggie moved a little closer to him. She was near enough now that he could have just reached out an arm and touched her. He didn't. What exactly did they say, she asked. Right before they took off running? His hands stopped moving the blade. For a good long while, the only thing you could hear was the crackling of the fire between them. The first one, she cried clean through the whole first night, he said, his voice getting real low. Said the mountain sounded like it was screaming. The second one, she made it 2 days. Said the quiet got to her. The third said I was too rough. The fourth said I was too cold. He stopped for a second. The fifth one said I had the devil looking out of my eyes. And the other two? The sixth one, she tried, lasted 5 days. Something in his voice changed then, like ice cracking on a river. She packed her bags while I was out hunting. Left a note that just said, I would rather die by myself in a city than live by myself next to you. A knot formed in Maggie's chest. She hadn't been expecting that. She hadn't been expecting to see that flash of old pain cross his face before he hid it away again. And the seventh one, Caleb's eyes went empty. The seventh took one look at me the first morning, said she'd made a terrible mistake, and asked Hank to take her on back to town before she even had breakfast. Before breakfast, Maggie repeated softly. She didn't even have a bite to eat, didn't even take a seat. The quiet that came after wasn't awkward. It was just heavy with something real. The weight of a man who'd been left so many times, he didn't expect anyone to ever stay. Maggie grabbed the stool from against the wall and drug it over to the table right across from his chair. The scraping sound was loud, and she meant for it to be. What in the world are you doing? He asked. I'm making it 2 chairs, she said, because I am eating breakfast right here tomorrow, Caleb Drummond. And the day after that one. And the day after that. So you had better get used to the sound of somebody chewing across the table from you. He just stared at her for a long minute. Then he turned back to his knife. But he didn't tell her to go. The first morning came on hot and bright. Maggie woke up to the sound of an axe. It was a steady, pounding rhythm that didn't let up. She pushed herself out of the unfamiliar bed, her back aching a little, and she opened the cabin door. Caleb was standing at the chopping block without a shirt on. His back looked like a road map of old scars. Some were from knives, some from bullets, and some were from things she couldn't even guess at. Sweat dripped down his spine in the early morning light. He brought the axe down with a loud crack that split a log right in two, and then he reached for another one without missing a beat. You planning on chopping down every tree on this whole mountain? Maggie called out from the doorway. He didn't even turn around. You planning on sleeping till noon? It's barely past sunrise, you impossible man. Sunrise was an hour ago. Maggie crossed her arms over her chest and just watched him work. Every single swing was controlled, full of power, and landed just right. The man moved like the mountain itself had taught him. No wasted effort, no second guessing. I'll get breakfast started, she said, and try not to criticize it before you even taste it. I don't criticize, he said. You criticize everything. You criticized me the minute I stepped my foot off that coach. He stopped with his axe halfway through a swing, buried deep in the stump. He turned slow, and those pale gray eyes of his found hers. I didn't criticize you, he said, his voice quiet. I counted. Counted what? How many days it would be until you leave. The words hit Maggie harder than she thought they would. Not because they were mean, but because they were true. This man didn't say things to hurt you. He just expected to be disappointed because that was all he had ever known. She held his stare, then said, "Well, you can stop counting." He pulled the axe loose and swung again. "We'll see about that." By noon, they had their first real fight. Maggie had scrubbed the cabin floor, aired out the animal hides, and started a pot of beans cooking with some salt pork she'd found. When Caleb came inside, he looked at the pot and just grunted, "Beans are too thin." Maggie's hand got tight around the big spoon. "These beans are just fine. I have been cooking beans for 8 years. Those are too thin." "Well, maybe 8 years of eating all by yourself has ruined your taste for things." He sat down at the table with a thud. "I didn't ask for your opinion, and I didn't ask for a husband who treats me like I'm the hired help. But I guess this is where we are." They ate without another word. Caleb finished his whole bowl, pushed it away, and didn't say a thing. Maggie figured that was a compliment. Later that afternoon, she found him behind the cabin, skinning a rabbit. She watched him for a second, then said, "Show me how." He looked up at her. "Show you how to do what?" "How to skin it right. If I'm going to live up here, I need to know the things you know." He looked her over for a long moment, then moved aside to make some room for her. "Hold the knife right here. Pull the skin back, just like this. Don't go too fast. If you rush it, you'll mess up the meat." Their hands were right next to each other. His were huge next to hers, all scarred up and rough as tree bark. But he guided her with a gentleness she sure hadn't expected from a man who was so blunt about everything else. "There you go," he said when she was done. "Not bad." "Not bad?" Maggie raised her eyebrows. "That's the nicest thing you've said to me since I got here. Don't get used to it." But that night, when she put his supper down in front of him, he ate the whole thing without a single complaint. And when she pulled her stool a little closer to the fire and started mending one of his old shirts, he didn't get up and move away. On the third day, everything changed. Caleb came back from a hunt with blood on his sleeve and a limp in his walk. Maggie saw it the second he came out of the trees. "What happened to you?" she said, meeting him right at the door. "It's nothing. You are bleeding. It's just a scratch. Caleb Drummond, you sit yourself down right now and let me take a look at that arm, or so help me, I will wrestle you down into that chair myself." He just blinked at her. Nobody had talked to him like that in a real long time. He sat down. She rolled up his sleeve and saw a long gash on his forearm. It was deep enough that it needed cleaning, but not stitches. Her hands were steady as she washed it out, then put some salve on it she'd made from lard and herbs. "How did this happen?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "A mountain lion came at me down by the creek. It got one good swipe in before I took care of it." A mountain lion. Maggie's hands didn't start shaking, but her voice got real tight. "You fought a mountain lion and you call it nothing? I've fought worse." She finally looked up then, her brown eyes searching his scarred face. "I know you have," she said softly. "And I reckon that's the whole problem." Caleb didn't move a muscle. The firelight flickered across the big scar on his jaw and the deep lines around his eyes. For just a second, he didn't look like a mountain man. He looked like a soldier who never quite made it all the way home. "You were in the war," Maggie said. It wasn't a question. His jaw muscle jumped. "Fought for the Union for 3 years. Came back home to nothing. Absolutely nothing. My wife left me while I was gone. Took up with some fella who stayed behind. The farm went to the bankers. Everything I had ever built was just gone." His voice was flat as a board, but his hands on the table were curled up into fists. "So I came up here and built this place. I figured if the world didn't want me, then I didn't want the world." Maggie finished wrapping up his arm. She tied the cloth real tight, then held onto his hand for just a second longer than she needed to. "We make quite a pair then," she said. "My own family threw me out because they said no man would ever want me. Said I was too big, too plain, and too much trouble." She took a breath. "My own brother sold our daddy's house and put my trunk out on the porch like it was trash to be thrown away." Caleb's eyes finally lifted up to meet hers. Something behind all that ice finally cracked. Just a little bit, Just enough to let a little bit of warmth get through. Your brother did that to you? He sure did. Then your brother is a fool. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a sweet compliment. But coming from a man who had barely said 10 words to her since she got there, it meant everything. She let go of his hand and stood up. Supper will be ready in about an hour. Try not to get into any more fights with lions before then. The corner of his mouth twitched just a little. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was closer than anything she had seen yet. On the 5th day, Hank Beaumont brought some supplies up the mountain. He climbed down from his wagon, looking at the cabin like he fully expected to see Maggie's bags all packed on the porch. Instead, he found her outside with her sleeves rolled up high, helping Caleb stack firewood to dry. They were working in a rhythm. She would hand him a piece, he would stack it. They weren't talking, but they moved together like two parts of the very same machine. Hank just stopped in his tracks. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. Maggie wiped her forehead with the back of her arm and grinned. "Mornin', Mr. Beaumont. Did you bring us any flour?" "Yes, ma'am." "Flour, salt, sugar." He could not stop staring at them. "You're still here. Well, where else would I be?" Hank looked over at Caleb. The mountain man didn't look up from his stacking, but Hank could have sworn that the tightness in those big shoulders of his had eased up, just a little. Just enough that you'd notice if you'd spent years watching that man carry the weight of the whole world by himself. 5 days, Hank said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ain't nobody ever made it to 5 days. He's stubborn," Caleb grumbled without even looking her way. "I like to think of it as determined," Maggie corrected him. "Well, I prefer stubborn," Hank chimed in with a laugh. A genuine booming laugh that rolled down the mountainside. "Lord have mercy, she's actually got you talking. That's more than you've said to me in 3 whole years, Drummond." Caleb finally glanced up. His pale eyes met Maggie's for just a heartbeat, just long enough for some silent message to pass between them. "The woman just won't quit talking," Caleb said. "A man has to answer sooner or later, or his ears will fall off." Maggie tossed a little piece of bark that landed square on his back. "You know you love it. I put up with it. That's a step in the right direction." Hank set the last of the supplies on the porch and tipped his hat. "I'll be back in 2 weeks with another load. That is, if you're still around, Miss Hollowell." "It's Mrs. Drummond now," Maggie said, lifting her chin. "That was the deal we made." Hank drove off, just shaking his head. And for the very first time in 7 brides, he didn't feel a lick of pity for the woman he was leaving behind on that mountain. That night, with the summer heat pressing in on the cabin and the cicadas buzzing a storm in the dark, Maggie sat near the open window, patching his shirt. Caleb was across from her, cleaning his rifle, the lamplight casting long, dancing shadows over his scarred face. "Caleb, why in the world do you keep sending for wives if you do not actually want one?" His hands stopped moving on the rifle. The question just hung there in the air between them like a cloud of smoke. "Because," he said, his voice slow and measured, "a man gets weary of being by himself, even when being alone is all he has ever known." Maggie's needle froze mid-stitch. She looked right at him. I mean, she truly looked. Past the scars and the quiet and the tough-as-granite shell he wore like another layer of skin. "Then you should stop pushing them away," she said, her voice soft. "I do not push them. They leave. They leave because you make it impossible for them to stay." "And what about you?" His voice got lower. "Why are you still here?" Maggie put the shirt down in her lap. Her gaze was steady, fiery, and filled with a feeling Caleb had not seen aimed his way in more years than he could count. "Because every single person I have ever cared about has thrown me away," she said. "And I made a promise to myself that I would never give a man the power to make me feel like I was worthless again. You can grunt and you can scowl and you can sharpen your blades all night long, Caleb Drummond, but I am still going to be sitting right in this spot come morning." The silence that came after was not cold. It was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that settles when two people who have been broken finally stop pretending they are okay and just accept the truth of who they are. Caleb placed the rifle on the floor. "Then sit," he said softly. I am not about to stop you. Outside, it felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. The summer stars hung low and burned so bright, and somewhere deep inside the chest of the man that no bride had ever stuck around for, something changed. It was a feeling he had not had since before the war, before the betrayal, before all the years of silence and being alone had turned his heart into a rock. He did not put a name to it. He was not ready for that. But when Maggie started humming a little tune as she picked her sewing back up, Caleb Drummond did not tell her to be quiet, and that, more than anything else, scared him half to death. The second week kicked off with a disagreement about coffee. Maggie had discovered a tin of ground beans tucked away behind the flour barrel. It was old, but it would do. She brewed a pot before the sun came up and placed a mug on the table where Caleb was cleaning his traps. He picked it up, took a single sip, and put it right back down. That is not coffee. Maggie turned around from the stove. I beg your pardon? I said, that is not coffee. That is hot water making believe it is coffee. I used the very same beans you have been stashing behind the flour like some kind of pack rat. You did not use nearly enough. I used plenty. You used about half of what you should have. Maggie snatched the mug off the table, took a long swallow herself, and slammed it back down. Tastes perfectly fine to me. Then there is something wrong with your tongue. My tongue is working just fine, Caleb Drummond. It is your manners that could use a little work. He almost smiled. Almost. She caught it, though, that little twitch at the corner of his mouth, the tiny crack in that stone wall he called a face. But he hid it away fast, grabbed his rifle, and made for the door. I will be back before it gets dark. Try not to burn supper. Try not to get eaten by a cougar. I already did that once. Was not too impressed. The door clicked shut behind him, and Maggie stood there in that quiet cabin holding that cup of coffee, and for reasons she could not begin to explain, she had a big grin on her face. She hated that she was grinning. The man was impossible. He was rude, cold, and as stubborn as a mule tied to a fence. But somewhere underneath all that growling and snapping, she kept seeing little flashes of something more. The way he had given her the bed without her even having to ask. The way he had called her brother a fool. The way his voice had softened the other night when he said, I am not about to stop you. Maggie washed the cups and told herself to quit thinking on it. She had chores to do. By the middle of the morning, she had rearranged all the supplies, swept the entire cabin twice, and had started patching the holes in Caleb's second shirt, which was the only other one he had. The man lived his life like he was serving a punishment. 2 shirts, 1 pair of boots, a bed so skinny it could hardly hold his big frame. No photographs, no mementos, not a single thing that said a human being lived here instead of some lonely ghost. She was sewing the collar when she heard hoofs beats. That was not Caleb. Caleb did not ride. He walked everywhere he went. He always said horses made too much racket and scared off all the game. These hooves were coming up the path fast with a heavy sound from down in the valley. Maggie put down the shirt and walked over to the door. A woman was sitting on a chestnut-colored horse, pulling it to a sharp stop in the clearing. She was a small woman with silver hair, maybe around 60 years old, with sharp blue eyes and a face that told you she had faced down every bad thing life could throw at her, and had come out on the other side, still fighting. You must be the new one, the woman said, swinging down from her horse with a surprising amount of grace. The new what? Bride number 8, unless I've lost count somewhere along the way. The woman held out her hand. Anna Pierce. I own the general store down in Silver Falls. Hank told me you were still alive up here, and I just had to come see it with my own 2 eyes. Maggie shook her hand. Maggie Hollowell. And I am not just alive, Mrs. Pierce. I am doing quite well. Anna let out a warm, hearty laugh that seemed to fill up the whole clearing. Doing well with Caleb Drummond. Honey, that is either the bravest thing I have heard all year long or the most foolish. Can it not be a little of both? Anna looked her over with those sharp eyes, the same way Hank had looked at her. The same way they all looked at her, searching for the weak spot, the breaking point, the moment she would finally give up. Come on inside, Maggie said. I just made some coffee, and before you say anything, I already know it is weak. Anna followed her in, took a seat on the stool Maggie had taken as her own, and wrapped her hands around the cup. She took a little sip and gave a nod. It is perfect. That man would not know good coffee if it jumped up and bit him on the nose. That is what I told him. Did he tell you about the other ones? Maggie sat down across from her. A little. The ones who cried. The ones who ran away. The one who left a letter. Anna's expression softened. That would be Sarah. Bride number 6. The sweetest girl you would ever want to meet. She lasted 5 days. She tried with all her might. But Caleb, he just does not know how to let another person get close. He puts people to the test without even realizing he's doing it. He just pushes and pushes until they shatter, and then he tells himself he was right all along. Right about what? That nobody ever stays. A knot formed in Maggie's chest. His wife, the one who left him during the war. Anna's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. He told you about Ellen? Not very much, just that she left him. Anna set her cup down slowly. Ellen did not just leave Maggie, she cleaned him out completely, sold every single thing he owned, his horses, his tools, even his father's pocket watch. She took up with a man named Dutch Garrett, a Confederate sympathizer who was as mean as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly. Anna's voice dropped to a whisper. When Caleb finally came home from the war, all he found was an empty house and a letter she had nailed to the door. It said she would rather live with a coward who stayed behind than a fool who went off to fight. Maggie's hands balled up into tight fists on the tabletop. Caleb went and found Dutch, Anna went on. They had a terrible fight. That scar on Caleb's jaw? Dutch is the one who gave it to him with a Bowie knife. Caleb gave him a whipping that nearly sent him to his maker, but he let the man live. Said killing the man over a woman who chose to walk away just was not worth the noose they would put around his neck. And Ellen passed on 2 years later. A fever took her in some dusty mining camp out in Nevada. Caleb never said her name out loud again. All of a sudden, the cabin felt a whole lot smaller, like the walls were closing in. Maggie stared down at the table, at the little grooves Caleb's knife had etched into the wood from years of sharpening. She saw them different now. They were not just the habits of a man who liked a sharp blade. They were the rituals of a man trying to keep his hands busy so his own mind would not just eat him alive. There is something else you ought to know, Anna said, and her voice got a different edge to it, sharper, harder. Dutch Garrett is back. Maggie's head shot up. Back where? In the valley. He rode in about 2 weeks ago with a whole crew of fellas. They have been making camp down by the river, hunting on land that is not theirs, and helping themselves to supplies from homesteads without so much as a howdy-do. The folks in Silver Falls are plain scared. Does Caleb know? Caleb always knows everything that moves on his mountain. He just does not see fit to tell anybody about it. Maggie thought back over the last few days. The way Caleb would check his rifle twice before heading out. The way his eyes would scan the tree line every single time he stepped foot outside. The solid knot of tension in his shoulders that never quite went away, even when the day was all done. He knows, Maggie said. He has been watching. Anna reached her hand across the table and put a firm grip on Maggie's wrist. Now you listen to me. If Dutch finds out Caleb's got a woman staying up here, he will come for you. Not for supplies, not for furs, but purely out of spite. That man has been nursing a grudge for 10 long years, and hurting whatever Caleb cares about would be the sweetest kind of revenge he could ever dream up. Then I reckon it is a good thing Caleb does not care about me, Maggie said. Anna's gaze was steady as a rock. Honey, I have known that man for 8 years. He let you stay 5 days. He told you about Ellen. He is fighting a whole lot harder than you know. Anna was gone before Caleb got back. Maggie stood there in the doorway watching the dust settle behind the mayor's horse, and she felt the full weight of what she just learned pressing down on her chest like a big old stone. She could leave. That would be the smart thing to do. Just climb on the very next stagecoach and vanish back into some town where nobody gave a lick if she lived or died. At least there, the only danger was being lonely, not some man with a knife and a 10-year-old grudge. But Maggie had made herself a promise on a rainy porch clear back in Ohio with her whole life tied up in a flour sack. She would never run from anything again. When Caleb walked through that door at dusk, with 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder, Maggie was waiting right there at the table. Supper was ready, and the coffee was strong this time. He had used double the beans just to shut him up about it. He sat down, took a sip of the coffee, and said absolutely nothing. "Well," she pushed, "it is coffee. That is about the nicest thing you have ever said to me." They ate a stew made from the rabbit with wild onions and the very last of the dried herbs Maggie had found in an old jar. Caleb ate 2 full bowls and did not complain once. Maggie watched him from across the table, turning Anna's words over and over in her mind. "Anna Pierce came by today," she said. Caleb's spoon stopped moving. "She told me all about Ellen." His chair screeched against the floorboards. He stood up, crossed over to the fireplace, and braced both his hands against the mantel. His back was to her, and every single muscle in his shoulders was locked up tight. She had no right. She had every right in the world. "I am living in your cabin, Caleb. I am eating your food, mending your shirts, and sleeping in your bed while you lie on the floor like a stray dog. I deserve to know what kind of situation I walked into. You walked into a marriage arrangement, not my past. Your past is standing right here in this room. It is in every wall you have built, every woman you have run off. Every single night you sit right there sharpening that knife, like you're getting ready for a war that was over a long time ago." He spun around to face her. It did not end. His voice was raw, cracked wide open in a way she had never heard before. "It does not end. You do not just come home from that and stop. The fighting does not stop. It just moves inside of you." Maggie stood up. She did not back away from the fire she saw burning in his eyes. She took a step toward it. "I know," she said. "You think I do not know what it is like to fight a war inside your own head? To wake up every morning and hear every voice that ever told you that you are nothing? My brother's voice, my mother's silence, every man who looked right through me like I was invisible." Her voice shook a little, but she kept it steady. "I fight that war every single day of my life, Caleb. The only difference between you and me is that I stop pretending I'm fine." The cabin fell silent. The fire popped and crackled. A little moth beat its wings against the window glass. Caleb's hands dropped away from the mantel. He just stood there, all 6'4" of him, nothing but hard muscle and old scars, and he looked at Maggie Hollowell like he was truly seeing her for the very first time. "She did not just leave," he said, and his voice was barely more than a whisper. "She laughed when I found her with Dutch. She laughed right in my face and said, 'What did you expect? You were always more mountain than you were a man.' And I believed her. Every bride since then, every woman who ran off, I just told myself she was right, that I am just not built for this." Maggie closed the distance between them. She was close enough to feel the heat coming off his body, close enough to see the pulse beating like a drum in his throat. "She was wrong," Maggie said, "and you have been punishing yourself for her lie ever since that day." His jaw was working. His eyes were wet, though he would probably die before he ever admitted it. "You do not know me. I know you gave me your bed on the very first night without me even asking. I know you taught me how to skin a rabbit with more patience than you show anything else in this whole world. I know you have not once looked at me the way folks back home did, like I was something to be pitied." She swallowed hard. "You look at me like you are afraid, and that tells me a whole lot more than you have ever said out loud." Caleb's hand came up, all rough and scarred and trembling, and it stopped just inches from her face. He held it right there, hanging in the air, like if he touched her it would break something he was not ready to fix. Then he just let it drop. "Do not stay because you feel sorry for me," he rasped out. "I do not feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for every woman who left before she got to see what I see." He turned away from her, walked to the door, and stood there with his hand on the frame, his back heaving up and down. "Dutch Garrett is in the valley," he said without turning around. "I know. Anna told me. He will come up here. He always does. Then we will be ready for him." He glanced over his shoulder. "We?" Maggie crossed her arms over her chest. "You heard me plain." Something flickered in his eyes. Not the ice she was used to seeing, not the stone, but something cracked and desperate and almost like hope. He pushed right through the door out into the hot night air and did not come back for a whole hour. When he did, Maggie was still awake, mending a shirt by the light of the lamp. He sat down across from her, picked up his rifle, and just started cleaning it. They did not say a word, but the silence between them was different again. It was not cold, and it was not heavy. It just hummed like a wire pulled so tight it was about to sing. Caleb cleared his throat. "You made the coffee strong. You are welcome." "I did not say thank you. You were about to." The faintest little rumble came from deep in his chest. She had learned to recognize what it was. It was his version of a laugh, buried so deep inside him that most folks would miss it entirely. "You are impossible," he muttered, "and you are stubborn. Sounds like a match made in heaven." He just shook his head, but he did not argue with her. 3 days later, it finally happened. Maggie was hauling water up from the creek when she heard the loud snap of branches right behind her. She spun around fast, the bucket sloshing water everywhere, and found herself face to face with a fella she had never laid eyes on before. He was tall and rangy, with a face like a hatchet, and a smile that did not come anywhere near his eyes. A Confederate cavalry hat sat tilted on his head, all faded and fraying at the edges. 2 more men stood right behind him, holding their rifles all loose in their hands. "Well, well," the man drawled out. "So old Caleb finally found one that decided to stick around." Maggie tightened her grip on the bucket handle. "Who are you?" "The name is Dutch Garrett." He tipped his hat at her, mocking her. "Me and your husband, we go way back. He did not mention you." Maggie's blood ran cold, but her face stayed hard as iron. "Can't say that he did. I guess you must not be worth mentioning." Dutch's smile froze right on his face. His men shifted their weight behind him. "Got some fire in her, huh?" Dutch said. "Ellen was full of fire, too, for a little while." "I am not Ellen." "No, ma'am. You surely are not." His eyes traveled all over her, slow and deliberate, the way a man sizes up something he is planning on taking. "You are bigger, sturdier, built to last." He leaned in a little closer. "The question is, does Caleb deserve something that is built to last?" Maggie threw that whole bucket of water straight into his face. Dutch stumbled backward, spitting and sputtering, his hat knocked clean off his head. His men lurched forward, but Maggie was already moving, marching right past them, her shoulders squared up, her heart hammering so loud she could hear it in her own ears. "You tell your boys to stay off this mountain," she called out over her shoulder without even breaking her stride. "And the next time you come anywhere near me, it will not be water." She heard Dutch cussing a blue streak behind her, and she heard one of his men give a nervous little laugh. She did not turn around. She walked straight up that trail, her fists clenched tight, her jaw set until she reached the cabin and shoved her way right through the door. Caleb was inside. He took one single look at her, soaked sleeves, flushed face, shaking hands, and was on his feet. "What happened? Your old friend Dutch paid me a visit down at the creek." Every single muscle in Caleb's body tensed up. His hand went to his rifle like it was a part of his own arm. "Did he touch you?" "No. I threw a bucket full of water right in his face before he had the chance." Caleb just stared at her. "You threw water?" "Yes, a whole bucket," right in his smug Confederate face. Then something amazing happened. Caleb Drummond, the mountain man, the cursed husband, the man that no woman could ever get through to, laughed. It was not the quiet rumble she had heard before. It was a real laugh, deep and rough, pulled from somewhere so far inside of him that it sounded like it pained him to let it out. Maggie just blinked. "Are you laughing? You threw water at Dutch Garrett. He deserved a whole lot worse than that. He deserved a bullet." Caleb's laughter disappeared as quickly as it had come. His face became hard again. "He knows you're here now. Here. That changes everything. I am not leaving. I did not ask you to leave." He took a step closer to her. "I am asking you to let me be the one to handle this." "Handle it." "How?" "My way." Maggie stood in his path to the door. "Your way got you a scar across your face and 10 years alone on a mountain. Maybe it is time we tried a different way. And what way would that be?" "Ours." That single word just hung in the air between them. Ours. small, weigh, and feel both immense and tiny at once. Caleb looked down at this woman who was standing in his doorway, as if she had grown roots right into the floorboards. A forgotten ache stirred deep in his chest. You cannot fend off Dutch Garrett with a bucket of water, Maggie. And you can no longer fight him on your own. Not now. Not when you have something here that is worth protecting. He held his breath. And what exactly is worth protecting? Maggie met his gaze without flinching. You tell me. He did not give her an answer, but he also did not make her move from the doorway. They stood so close they could almost feel the heat from each other, while the sweltering summer air seemed to press in on them. For one long, tense moment, the entire mountain seemed to be holding its breath. Then Caleb reached around her, closed the door, slid the bolt across, and turned back to face her. Tomorrow, he said, his voice low, I will teach you how to shoot a rifle. Maggie's eyebrows flew up. Shoot a rifle? If Dutch decides to come back, and I know he will, I need to be sure you can defend this place. I can defend myself just fine. I threw a bucket of water at him. Yes, you did. Next time it will be a bullet. He offered her his second rifle, the smaller one he usually kept beside the bed. Maggie accepted it. The weapon felt heavier than she had anticipated, its cold steel feeling serious in her hands. At first light, he said, We will begin. Maggie simply nodded. As she took the rifle from him, their fingers brushed against each other, and for a split second, neither of them moved away quickly enough to pretend it was just an accident. That night, Caleb did not get any sleep by the fire. He stayed planted in the chair by the door with his rifle laid across his knees, just watching and guarding. Maggie was lying in the bed, looking up at the ceiling and listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Caleb. Yeah. Thank you for the rifle. There was a pause. Do not thank me. Learn how to use it. I will. Another quiet moment passed. It was longer this time. Then his voice was so low she almost did not hear it. Maggie. Yeah. I am glad you threw the water. She could not help but smile there in the darkness. Me too. Outside, the mountain was peaceful, but they both understood that peace would not last. Dutch Garrett had found what he was searching for. The one thing Caleb Drummond cared about. The one thing that would hurt him the most to lose. And Caleb, sitting in that chair with his rifle and his scars and his broken heart, made a choice he had not made in 10 years. He decided to fight for something more than just staying alive. He just was not quite ready to call it love. Caleb placed the rifle into her hands at the first sign of dawn, and did not speak a single word. He just motioned his head toward the knot on a pine trunk about 30 paces away, and took a step back. Maggie raised the rifle. It felt heavier than she recalled, with the stock pressing hard into her shoulder. She squinted one eye, aimed the shot the way she had seen him do, and then she pulled the trigger. The force of the kick almost knocked her right off her feet. The bullet disappeared into the dirt, a good 6 feet to the left of the tree. Lord Almighty, she whispered, rubbing her aching shoulder. Again, Caleb said, I think I just about dislocated my arm. Again. She clenched her jaw, reloaded the rifle, braced herself more firmly, and fired. This time the bullet hit the bark. It was not the knot, but it was the trunk. It was close enough to feel like she was making progress. Better, Caleb said. Better. I hit the tree. You hit a tree, not the tree. There is a big difference between being close and staying alive, Maggie. She felt a sharp reply on her tongue, but the way he said it was so flat and serious without any hint of making fun of her. It told her this was not about her pride. This was about her survival. They practiced like that for an hour. By the time they finished, Maggie's shoulder was throbbing, her ears were ringing, and her hands were shaking. But she had hit that knot 2 times. After the second time, Caleb gave her one short nod. You will do. I will do. That is all? What do you want? A medal? A thank you would be nice. Thank you for not shooting me. Maggie lowered the rifle and saw the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Was that a joke, Caleb Drummond? No, ma'am, that was genuine relief. She laughed out loud. He did not. But his eyes seemed warmer than she had ever seen them before. Not by a lot, just by a single degree. Like the very first thaw after a long, hard freeze. It was barely enough to notice unless a person had been looking for it. And Maggie had been looking. They walked back toward the cabin in silence. But it was a comfortable kind now, the sort of quiet that exists between two people who no longer need words to fill every space. Caleb carried both of the rifles. Maggie carried the pouch of ammunition. Their arms brushed against each other once on the narrow path, and neither of them pulled away. Inside the cabin, Maggie started making coffee while Caleb sat down at the table and smoothed out a roughly drawn map of the mountain. He had sketched it out himself, showing every trail, every place to cross the creek, and every ridge where a man could either hide or get ambushed. "Dutch camps here," he said, tapping a finger on a spot close to the river. 3 men, maybe 4 of them. They move their camp every few days, but they always have to come back for water. "How long have you been watching them? Since before you arrived?" Maggie's hand stopped moving over the coffee pot. "You knew he was out there when you sent for a bride?" A muscle in Caleb's jaw tightened. "I sent for a bride 6 months ago. Dutch showed up 3 weeks back. If I had known, I would not have..." "Would not have what?" "Let me come here." His silence was all the answer she needed. "Well, I am here now," Maggie said, "and I am not going anywhere, so stop looking like you just swallowed a hornet and tell me the plan." He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict raging behind his eyes. There was the part of him that wanted to lock her inside the cabin and handle this by himself, going up against the part that was starting to realize she would not let him. "The plan is simple," he finally said. "We do not provoke them. We do not engage them. We just wait. Dutch wants a reaction. He is hoping I will come charging down that mountain so he can claim it was self-defense when he puts a bullet in me. And if he comes up here, well, then he has to face the mountain and me." Caleb's hand tightened into a fist on top of the map. "Maggie, do not you dare tell me to go hide in a corner while you go out and play the hero. I threw water right in that man's face yesterday, Caleb. He already knows I am here. Hiding me is not going to change that." He let out a harsh breath through his nose. "You are the most stubborn woman God ever decided to put on this earth. And you married me, so what does that make you?" He did not have an answer for that one. He folded up the map, pushed it into his coat pocket, and picked up his rifle. "I am going to go check the trails. Bar the door after I leave. Do not open it for anyone who is not me. How will I know it is you?" He stopped at the door. "I will knock 3 times. What if Dutch knocks 3 times? Dutch does not knock." The door shut. Maggie slid the bar across, then just stood there with her back against the solid wood, her heart pounding in her chest. She pressed her hand flat against the rough timber and felt the cabin holding strong all around her. This strange, rugged shelter. That little cabin was starting to feel less like a cage and more like a place worth fighting for. Caleb had been gone for hours. Maggie took the time to clean both rifles, load them up, and put one near the bed and the other right by the door. She sharpened the big kitchen knife until you could split a hair with it. Then she just sat at the table and waited. The knock on the door came right as the sun was going down. 3 hard raps. She pulled the door open. Caleb was standing there, but he was not by himself. Behind him, sitting on a gray mule, was Hank Beaumont, his face looking mighty grim under that crooked hat of his. "We have a problem," Hank said, climbing down real slow. "Dutch paid a visit to the Morrison place this morning. Took all their winter supplies, every last jar. He worked over old Tom Morrison pretty bad when he tried to put up a fight." A cold feeling settled in Maggie's stomach. "Is he alive?" "He is alive. But he is hurting. He has 3 broken ribs. His wife had to walk 8 miles into town to get some help. She carried their littlest one on her hip the whole way." Caleb leaned his rifle up against the wall. His face was like stone, but his hands were shaking. It was not from fear. It was from a rage so tight it looked like it might just shatter his bones. "How many men does Dutch have with him now?" Caleb asked. 6, maybe 7 of them. He picked up some drifters down at the trading post, all armed and drunk about half the time. The sheriff over in Silver Falls will not do a thing about it. He claims it is outside of the town's jurisdiction. The sheriff is a coward, Maggie said flat out. The sheriff is just outnumbered, Hank corrected her. It is 1 man with a badge against 7 men with rifles. You cannot really blame him for knowing the odds. Caleb started pacing. 3 steps one way, then 3 steps back again. The tiny cabin was not nearly big enough to hold all of his anger. Dutch does not care about the homesteads. He is coming for me. What he did to Morrison was just a message. Then you ought to give him what he wants, Maggie said. Both of the men turned and stared at her. Not in that way, she said in a hurry. What I mean is you need to stop waiting around. Waiting just lets him pick the time and the place. You need to ride into town. You go talk to the other homesteaders, Tom Morrison, the Granger family, the widow Pierce, and everyone else Dutch has been bullying. You have to build something bigger than just 1 man hiding on a mountain. Hank's eyebrows shot straight up. She's talking about getting a posse together. I am talking about neighbors, Maggie said. Folks protecting what belongs to them. Together. Caleb stopped his pacing. He looked at her like she was speaking some language he had not heard in years. I do not ask other people for help. I know you do not. And that is exactly why you have been all alone for 10 years. The words landed like a punch. She saw them hit him. She saw the little flinch he tried so hard to hide. It was the first crack in that armor he wore like a second skin. Caleb, she said, her voice a little softer now. You cannot fight 6 men all by yourself. You know you cannot. And dying up on this mountain just to prove how tough you are is not going to protect anybody. It just proves that Dutch was right all along. Right about what? That you would rather die all alone than put your trust in another living person. The little cabin fell completely silent. Hank started staring at the floorboards. Caleb just looked at Maggie. And Maggie held his gaze, not blinking, not backing down one bit, because she knew deep in her bones that this was the real test. It was not the gunfight. It was not the big showdown. It was this moment, right here, with a man deciding if he was going to keep building walls around himself or finally start tearing them down. Caleb's shoulders slumped just a little bit. It was just enough. Tomorrow, he said, I will ride down to Silver Falls. We will ride down, Maggie corrected him. Maggie, Hank coughed into his hand, trying to cover up what sounded a lot like a laugh. I will have some horses ready for you at the bottom of the trail, at dawn. He tipped his hat, climbed back on his mule, and vanished down the path. Maggie and Caleb stood there in the doorway, just watching the dust settle. You know, Caleb said in a quiet voice, you are bossier than any sergeant I ever had to serve under. And you are more hard-headed than any mule I have ever had to deal with. I guess that makes us even. He looked over at her. The evening light caught his face just right, showing the scar, the hard line of his jaw, and the pale eyes that had been like ice when she first got here. But now they held something else she could not quite figure out. It was something between being scared and giving in. Maggie. Yeah. If something bad happens tomorrow, nothing is going to happen. If it does, he turned to face her straight on. I just need you to know that I do not regret it, sending that letter. I regret a whole lot of things in my life, but I do not regret that. Her throat got tight. Caleb Drummond, if you are trying to say something nice, you are doing a real bad job of it. I am doing the best I can. I know. She reached up and touched his arm, just the tips of her fingers on his sleeve, as light as a whisper. And for whatever it is worth, I do not regret answering it. He did not pull his arm away, he did not even flinch. For about 3 heartbeats they just stood there on the edge of that rough cabin, and it felt like the whole mountain was leaning in, holding its breath with them, just barely enough, smiled. They rode into the city and the people cheered. The king was pleased and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was pleased, and he gave them a feast. The king was just barely enough, smiled. They rode into Silver Falls before the real heat of the morning kicked in. Maggie sat on a borrowed horse behind Caleb, with her arms wrapped around his waist, and she could feel how tight and wound up his whole body was, like a spring pulled too far. He had not been into town for months. The last time he came down was to trade some furs, and he did not talk to a single person. And he was gone before noon. This was completely different. This time, he was here to ask for help. The town was not much to look at, just one single dirt road with some clapboard buildings on each side. There was a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a church with a steeple that leaned to one side. People stopped what they were doing and just stared as Caleb Drummond rode down the main street, with a woman sitting behind him. The whispers started up before their boots even hit the ground. Anna Pierce was waiting for them on the porch of her store, her arms crossed over her chest, with a look on her face that told them she had been expecting this very moment. "It is about time," she said. Caleb tied up the horse and did not say a word. Maggie climbed down from the horse and brushed the trail dust off of her dress. "We need to talk to the homesteaders," Maggie said. "Every single one that Dutch has bothered." "I already sent word out," Anna said. "Tom Morrison's wife is inside right now with the Granger boys. They have all been waiting for someone to finally say what everyone else has been thinking." "And what might that be?" Caleb asked. Anna looked him straight in the eye. "That it is high time to stop hiding and start fighting back. And that maybe the man from the mountain is not as cold-hearted as he makes himself out to be." Inside the store, 8 people were sitting on old barrels and wooden crates, and you could see the worry etched on all of their faces. Tom Morrison was there, with his ribs all wrapped up, and one of his eyes swollen completely shut. His wife Ruth sat right next to him, with their baby sleeping on her knee. The Granger brothers, Jake and Emmett, who were young, strong, and scared, were leaning up against the far wall. 2 other homesteaders that Maggie did not recognize sat toward the back. Every single eye in that room turned to Caleb the second he walked through the door. The whole place went quiet. Caleb just stood there looking huge, all scarred up and completely silent. Maggie could feel him pulling back into himself, hiding behind those walls he had spent a whole decade building. She reached out and touched his arm just for a moment. Just enough. He finally spoke. "Dutch Garrett has 7 men with him. They are all armed and they are mean. They took the Morrisons' supplies. They are going to take more. He is not going to stop, because stopping is not something a man like him does. Tom Morrison shifted on his crate, wincing from the pain. What are you suggesting we do, Drummond? You have lived up on that mountain all by yourself for years. You never once came down to help anybody. The accusation just hung there in the air like thick gun smoke. Maggie saw Caleb's jaw clench up tight. She saw that old instinct rise up in him. The urge to turn around, to walk away, to let the world prove what he already believed about himself. He is here now, Maggie said, stepping forward a little. That is what is important. Ruth Morrison looked right at her. And just who are you? I am his wife. A low murmur went through the room. Tom's good eye got real wide. You are the new bride number 8. The last one, Maggie said. And I am the only one who is staying. Now, are we going to sit around here and count up old grudges? Or are we going to figure out a way to stop Dutch Garrett from burning this whole valley straight to the ground? Jake Granger stood up a little straighter. I am in. Dutch took 3 of our horses just last week. My daddy is too proud to admit it, but we are in a bad way. We have all been in a bad way, Anna said, standing in the doorway. We have been hurting and hiding it, just hoping somebody else would come along and fix things. Well, nobody is coming. We have to fix this ourselves, or we are going to lose every last thing we have. Tom Morrison stared at Caleb for a good long while. Can you lead us in this, Drummond? You were in the war. You understand tactics. You know this mountain. Caleb's hand tightened into a fist at his side. Maggie saw the struggle in him. She watched the soldier inside him battle the hermit and the leader fight against the man who had been cast out. I can lead, he said finally, but it has to be every one of us. Nobody gets to sit this out. Nobody runs. He looked straight at Maggie when he said that last part. She held his gaze and gave a single nod. Then we will make our move tonight, Caleb said. Dutch's men like to drink down at the river camp after the sun goes down. They get careless. We will hit their supplies, scatter their horses, and make it perfectly clear that this valley is not theirs for the taking. That does not sound like a fight, Emmett Granger said. That sounds more like a raid. A fight will come later, Caleb replied. This is just the warning. They used the whole afternoon for planning. Caleb drew his map right there on Anna's counter. He marked every trail, every river crossing, every single blind spot. Maggie stood right next to him, turning his short military talk into plain words the homesteaders could understand. When Caleb said flank position, Maggie would say, Jake, you and Emmett need to circle around from the east. When Caleb said suppressive cover, Maggie would explain, Tom, you need to stay up on that ridge with a rifle and start firing if anyone even thinks about chasing us. By the time they were done, the plan was understood, and the people felt steady. They were not confident, but they were steady. Maggie knew there was a big difference between the two. As everyone started to leave, Anna gently pulled Maggie to the side. You realize he could not have done any of this without you. He could have, Maggie replied. He just would not have. That is the same thing. No, it is not. The ability was inside him this whole time. He just needed someone to remind him that he was not by himself anymore. Anna looked at her with those piercing blue eyes. You love him. The words caught in Maggie's throat. I have only known him for 2 weeks. I did not ask you how long. I asked if you love him. Maggie glanced across the store to where Caleb was carefully rolling up his map. His scarred hands moved with a deliberate precision. His shoulders seemed to carry the full weight of a plan that could either save their valley or get him killed. I think I am getting there, she said in a low voice. Faster than I ever thought I would. Anna gave her hand a firm squeeze. Then you hold on tight. Tonight is going to put everything to the test. The raid began well after midnight. Caleb led them down the mountain path in a single line. Their rifles were loaded and their boots were wrapped in cloth to quiet their steps. Maggie was at the very back of the line, holding a borrowed rifle close to her chest. Her heart was pounding so fiercely, she thought the entire valley must hear it. They arrived at Dutch's camp under the cover of darkness. There were 6 horses tied to a line. 3 tents were set up. A fire was burning low. Two men were slumped down beside it, drunk, with their rifles propped against some logs just within their reach. Caleb held up his fist. The entire group froze. He pointed to the left. Jake and Emmett crept toward the horses. He pointed to the right. Tom Morrison and the others spread out toward the supply wagons. Then he turned to look at Maggie and held up his open palm, a clear sign to stay put. For the first time, she did as she was told. Jake sliced through the picket line. The horses stirred, they snorted, and then they stampeded into the night. The two men by the fire jumped to their feet, shouting. Caleb fired one shot straight into the air, and the sound split the night open like a crack of thunder. "This is your only warning, Dutch." Caleb's voice boomed through the chaos. "If you touch another homestead, the next time we will aim lower." The camp exploded into confusion. Men stumbled out of their tents, cursing and grabbing for their rifles, but their horses were gone. Their supplies were scattered, and the darkness was suddenly filled with enemies they could not even see. Emmett shoved the supply wagon over. Flour, whiskey, and ammunition spilled out onto the ground. Jake fired 2 more shots into the air. The homesteaders pulled back quickly, disappearing into the trees like they were never there. Maggie was already heading up the trail when she heard the voice. Drummond. Dutch Garrett was standing at the edge of his camp, bare-chested with a pistol in each hand, his face contorted in pure fury. "You think this changes a single thing? You think your little posse of farmers scares me?" Caleb paused on the ridge. He turned to face him. "It is not a posse, Dutch. It is a town, and you are no longer welcome here." Dutch let out an ugly, raw laugh. "A town. You, the man who could not even keep his own wife, the man whose woman laughed right in his face. You are building something, Drummond, and I'm going to truly enjoy watching it all burn down." Maggie quickly grabbed Caleb's arm. "Do not. He wants you to come back down here." Caleb's entire body was trembling. Every single scar on his skin felt like it was on fire. But he looked down at Maggie, at her hand on his arm, at her eyes that were so steady in the moonlight, and he took a deep breath. "Let us go home," she said. He turned his back on Dutch Garrett and walked up the mountain without looking back once. It was the single hardest thing he had ever done. When they got back to the cabin, Caleb bolted the door, placed both rifles against the wall, and collapsed into his chair. His hands dangled between his knees. His head hung low. Maggie knelt down right in front of him. "You did the right thing. It did not feel right. It felt like I was running. Walking away from a man who wants to destroy you is not running. It is winning." He slowly raised his head. His eyes looked raw and stripped bare. All his defenses were gone. "He is going to come for us, Maggie. Everything he said about burning what I build, he meant every word. I know, and you are still here. Where else would I possibly be?" His hand reached out and found hers, rough skin against rough skin, scarred hands holding strong ones. He clung to it like a man holding onto a rope over the edge of a cliff, desperate, shaking, and completely unwilling to let go. "I do not know how to do this," he whispered. "Any of it. Being the kind of person that people depend on. Being the kind of person that you depend on. I have been alone for so long. I have forgotten what it feels like to matter to anyone at all." Maggie wove her fingers through his. "Then you will have to learn because you matter to me, Caleb Drummond. And I know that thought scares you. It scares me a little bit too. But I would much rather be scared here with you than feel safe somewhere without you." He pulled her hand up to his chest. She could feel his heartbeat. It was fast, hard, and alive. It was the heartbeat of a man who had been dead on the inside for a decade and was only now starting to remember how to breathe. "Dutch will come," he said one more time. "Let him. It is going to be ugly. I have seen ugly before. I married ugly." She paused for a moment. That did not come out right. The laugh that escaped him was broken and beautiful all at once. He pressed his forehead down against her knuckles and his shoulders began to shake. Not with sobs, not exactly, but with something much older and deeper. It was the release of a man who had been holding his breath for 10 long years. And finally, he let it all out. When he lifted his head, his pale eyes were crystal clear. "Tomorrow," he said, "we get ready. Dutch will not wait for long. Then neither will we." He did not let go of her hand. Not for a very long time. And when he finally did, it was not because he wanted to. It was because the fire needed more wood, the rifles needed to be reloaded, and the mountain itself seemed to be listening. A war was on its way to the high country, and for the very first time, Caleb Drummond was not going to face it all by himself. Dutch arrived on the third day. Maggie was inside kneading bread when Bristles began to growl. It was not the lazy kind of growl the dog used when squirrels got a little too brave. This was a low, deep, and steady sound. It was the kind of sound that comes from the chest of an animal that can smell blood in the air. Caleb was already at the window. He did not have to look for very long. "How many?" Maggie asked, wiping flour from her hands. "All of them." She snatched the rifle from its spot beside the door. Her hands were steady. She had been practicing every single morning since the raid. She could now hit the knot on the old tree 8 times out of 10. Caleb had said she shot better than half the men down in the valley. She had told him to stop trying to flatter her. He had just said he did not know how. "They are coming up the east trail," Caleb said, stepping back from the window. "They are spread out this time, being smart." Dutch learned his lesson from the raid. "What do we do?" "You are to stay inside. Bar the door right after I—" "Caleb." "Maggie, I swear to you, I am not hiding inside this cabin while you walk out there by yourself. We have already talked about this. Talking about something and actually living it are two very different things. Then let us start living it." He turned away from the window. Those pale eyes met hers, and they were desperate, burning with an emotion he still refused to name. She stared right back at him. "Together," she said. "That is the deal." His jaw tightened, and his fist clenched around the rifle. Then he reached for the second rifle and passed it to her. "You stay behind me. You only shoot if they shoot first. And if I go down, you're not going down. If I go down, you take that back trail straight to Anna's place. Do not stop. Do not look back. I will look back if I want to." "Maggie, fine. I will not look back, but you are not going down. I did not come all this way just to become a widow before I was even properly a wife." Something in his expression cracked then. Something raw and terrified and unbelievably tender all at once. He reached out and gripped her shoulder. It was not gentle, and it was not rough. It was just firm. It was the way a man holds on to something he knows he cannot afford to lose. "Stay close," he said. They stepped outside into the daylight together. Dutch Garrett was standing at the edge of the clearing with 6 of his men fanned out behind him. He looked different from the last time Maggie had seen him. He was cleaned up, freshly shaved, and wearing a long duster coat as if he were trying to look respectable. But his eyes were exactly the same. They were cold, mean, and patient, in the way a snake is patient right before it strikes. "Morning, Drummond," Dutch called out, tipping his hat. He brought the whole family with him this time. Maggie's fingers tightened around her rifle. "The big one even has a name." "Oh, I know your name, Mrs. Drummond. The whole valley knows it. The mail-order bride who managed to tame the mountain man." Dutch's lip curled up in a sneer. "That is a sweet story. It almost makes a man start believing in fairy tales." "Say what you came to say, Dutch," Caleb growled, "or get yourself off my mountain." Dutch spread his hands out wide with his palms facing up. He was the very picture of fake reason. "My business is real simple. This valley is changing, Caleb. There is a new railroad coming through here next spring. That means the land values are about to go way up. All these little homesteads are sitting on prime pieces of land. They are worth a whole lot more than the dirt farmers living on them even know. I'm just offering to help folks move somewhere else, being generous. You are stealing their land. I am encouraging a move with my fists and my rifles." Dutch's smile did not fade one bit. "I am a very persuasive man." You are a thief and a coward who beats up old men and makes threats against women." The smile disappeared. Dutch's hand slowly drifted down to the pistol he wore on his hip. "You be careful now. I was careful for 10 years. I sat up on this mountain and I let you rot in whatever hole you crawled out of. But then you came back. You hurt Morrison. You threatened my wife. And now you are standing on my land talking to me about business." He lifted the rifle. "So here is my counteroffer. You leave. You take your men. You ride south. And you do not stop until you hit Mexico. Because if you are still down in this valley by sundown tomorrow, I am going to end this. And I will not lose any sleep over it." The clearing became completely still. Even the birds went quiet. Dutch stared at Caleb for a long, hard moment. Then his eyes moved over to Maggie. Slowly and deliberately, he looked her up and down just like he had at the creek, sizing her up, judging her, and figuring out her value as a weapon he could use against the man standing beside her. "You know what I think," Dutch said in a soft voice. "I think you have gone soft, Drummond. I think this woman has made you start believing you are something that you are not. You are not a leader. You are not a husband. You are just a broken soldier hiding out on a rock." He paused for a moment. "And broken things are mighty easy to finish off." "We are done talking," Caleb said. "We are done when I say we are done." "No!" Maggie took a step forward. Caleb tried to grab her arm, but she shook herself free. "We are done because there is nothing you have that we could possibly want. Not your threats, not your schemes for the land, not your sad little grudge against a man who is worth 10 of you." She stood her ground firmly. "You think calling me big is going to make me cry? You think reminding him of Ellen is going to break him? We have both been broken by people far better than you, Dutch Garrett. And we are both still standing." Dutch's face turned a deep red. One of his men shifted his weight, his hand moving to his rifle. "You should teach your wife to hold her tongue," Dutch said to Caleb. "I tried," Caleb said. "It did not take." In spite of everything, the guns, the danger, and the 7 armed men, Maggie almost smiled. Dutch gave a sharp jerk of his head to his men. They got on their horses slowly and with purpose, making sure every single movement told them, "This is not over." Dutch was the last one to turn. He swung up onto his horse, settled his hat, and looked down at them. "Sundown tomorrow," he repeated, tossing Caleb's own words right back at him. "That is a nice deadline. I will be sure to keep it in mind." He tipped his hat toward Maggie. "Ma'am?" They all rode out. Maggie watched them go until the dust had completely settled. Then her knees just gave out. Caleb caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist, solid and certain. He held her up until she could find her legs again. "You stepped in front of me," he said. His voice was not angry. It was something else, something shaken. "I stepped beside you. There is a difference. He could have shot you." "He did not, Maggie." His voice broke right on her name. It just cracked right down the middle like a log that had been split by lightning. "Do not ever do that again." She looked up at him. His face was just inches away from hers, and his arm was still tight around her. She could feel his heart pounding against his shirt. "Then do not ever face him alone," she said. They stood there just like that, holding each other up. And for the first time since she had arrived on that mountain, neither of them tried to pretend it was anything less than exactly what it was. Caleb rode into town that afternoon. Maggie went along with him, and this time she sat in the front of the horse, with his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. Neither one of them said anything about the new arrangement. Neither of them had to. Silver Falls was buzzing with talk when they got there. News about the confrontation that morning had already made its way through town. That was Hank Beaumont's work, Maggie figured. That man could spread news faster than a telegraph wire. Anna met them at the general store. "Dutch came to your cabin with all of his men," Maggie said. "Oh, Lord." Anna's face turned pale. "What happened?" "Words," Caleb said. For now is not good enough. What is going to happen when the words stop working?" Caleb looked over at Maggie. She gave him a nod. "We need everyone," Caleb said. "Tonight at the church, every homesteader, every shopkeeper, every single person that Dutch has threatened or robbed or scared. A town meeting? Anna raised her eyebrows. You, Caleb Drummond, are calling a town meeting? It was my wife's idea. Your wife has good ideas. Do not tell her that. She is already impossible. Maggie elbowed him in the ribs. He did not even budge. The man was built like a solid boulder, but the corner of his lip twitched. By nightfall, 37 people were crowded into the small church. There were families Maggie had never even met. There were ranchers she had only ever heard about. Old-timers held their hunting rifles tight while young wives had worry etched deep in their eyes. The church was packed to the rafters, with people spilling out into the aisles and leaning up against the back walls. Caleb stood up at the pulpit. Maggie had never seen a man look more out of place. This was a man who could stare down a cougar and not so much as flinch. Yet a room full of eyes on him made his skin crawl. She stood right beside him, so close their arms were touching. He cleared his throat and spoke. Most of you folks know me as that fella up on the mountain. Some of you probably have a worse name for me. I have been up there by my lonesome for a good long while, and I will not stand here and pretend I came down to be a good neighbor. I am not one. I have paid this town no mind for years. He took a breath. But Dutch Garrett is not going to quit. He wants this whole valley. He wants your land, your cattle, and your businesses. And if we do not make a stand together, he is going to gobble it all up, one farm at a time. Tom Morrison got to his feet, his ribs still taped up. I believe him. Dutch took every last thing I owned. He would have taken more if my wife had not gotten away. Ruth Morrison stood next to her husband. I walked 8 miles with a baby on my hip because there was nowhere else on God's green earth to go. If somebody had stood up sooner, maybe I would not have had to. That landed hard in the quiet room. Folks fidgeted, glancing at each other, and then back at Caleb. Jake Granger spoke. My brother and I rode with Drummond on that raid. The man knows his business. He thinks like a soldier. If anybody can get the best of Dutch, it is him. But can we put our trust in him? The voice came from the back. It was an older man, arms folded across his chest. He has been a recluse for a decade. He goes through wives like kindling. Why in the world should we follow him? The room got real quiet. Maggie felt Caleb go rigid beside her. She felt that old hurt surface, the one that always whispered, nobody ever stays. Nobody ever trusts. Nobody ever wants you. She took a step forward. Because he is here, she said, her voice steady. He could be up on that mountain right now, with his door bolted and his rifle in his hands, just waiting for Dutch to show up. But instead, he is standing here in front of all of you asking for your help. And if you had any idea what it took for him to do that, you would know it is the bravest thing any man in this room has done in a long, long time. The older man let his arms fall to his sides. The feeling in the room changed, not with suspicion anymore, but with something a little warmer. I have known Caleb Drummond for 8 years, Anna Pierce said from her seat by the window. He is rough, he's rude, and he is harder to talk to than a fence post, but he is honest. He has never once taken a thing that was not his. That is a sight more than I can say for Dutch Garrett. I am in, Tom Morrison declared. We are in, Jake Granger said for him and his brother. One after another, hands started going up and voices joined in. The old fella in the back unfolded his arms, gave a single nod, and said, Tell us the plan. Caleb spread a map out on the pulpit. His voice grew stronger as he started talking. He pointed out trails, positions, and timing. The soldier in him came back to life, and Maggie watched as the people in the room listened to every word. These were not warriors. They were ranchers and shopkeepers and families who were scared spitless. But Caleb did not talk down to them. He gave them jobs they could do, spots they could hold, clear directions, and simple signals. When he was done, the room was quiet. It was not a scared quiet, but a ready quiet. At dawn, Caleb said, We get into place before Dutch's men are even awake. We will block the valley road, take the high ground, and when they make a move on the next homestead, we will already be waiting for them. And if they put up a fight? Someone asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then we fight back. But we will not fire the first shot. We will give them a chance to leave. What happens after that is their own doing. The meeting started to break up. People filed out into the warm night air, speaking in low tones, their lanterns lighting the way. Maggie stood on the church steps and watched them go. Just regular people who had decided to stand together against something bigger than any single one of them. Caleb came and stood next to her. You spoke up for me in there. Somebody had to. You were about to shut down and lose them all. I do not shut down. You shut down tighter than a clam at high tide. It is your signature move. He just shook his head, but when he looked over at her, his eyes were different. They were not made of ice anymore, not made of stone. There was something molten deep down, pushing its way through cracks he could not patch up anymore. What you said in there, he began, about it costing me, about it being brave. I meant every word. I know you did. That is what has me spooked. What has you spooked? That I meant it or that it is the truth? Both. Maggie turned to face him squarely. The lantern light from the church fell on her face, on her steady brown eyes. Her jaw was set with that same firmness it always had when she was about to say something that could not be unsaid. Caleb, I have something to tell you, and I need you to just listen, not run away from it. I do not run. You run all the time. You just do it while standing perfectly still. That one hit its mark. She saw the truth of it land in his eyes, sharp and clear. I am falling in love with you, she said. I do not know when it started. Maybe it was when you called my brother a fool. Maybe it was when you laughed about the water. Maybe it was when you took my hand after the raid and you did not let it go. Her voice was steady, even if her heart was hammering. I did not come up this mountain searching for love. I came looking for a place that would not cast me aside. But you gave me something more than that. You gave me a fight worth fighting for. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I do not feel what I'm feeling just because you are too scared to feel it back. Caleb stood there, 6'4" of a scarred, silent, and completely terrified man. He had the mountain at his back and the town down below, with 37 people counting on him to be strong enough to lead them into a fight he might not win. And this woman, this stubborn, loud, fearless, and impossible woman, was standing right in front of him, saying the very thing he had been running from since the day she first stepped out of that stagecoach. His hand came up. This time, he did not stop it. His calloused fingers gently touched her cheek, her jawline, and the soft curve of her neck where her pulse was beating fast. I am not scared, he said, his voice as raw as freshly turned earth. Liar. I am terrified, he admitted, leaning in closer. But not of you. I am terrified of losing you, of having something worth losing for the first time in 10 years, and knowing there is a man in this valley who wants to tear it away. He cannot take what I do not give him, and I do not give up easy, Caleb Drummond. No, ma'am, you surely do not. He kissed her then. It was nothing like the frantic stolen kisses in the dime novels she had read back in Ohio. This was slow and certain, and tasted of coffee and gun smoke, and the kind of promise a man makes when he is finally done running. She kissed him back with everything she was. Every lonely night, every time she had been told she was too much. She poured all of that into the kiss, and the force of it seemed to return to her twice over. As they finally parted, Caleb leaned his forehead against hers. Tomorrow is going to be a rough one, he said. I know. I need you to be safe. I have to know you are alive. Then we will both have to fight for what we need. She reached for his hand, weaving her fingers between his and holding on with all her might. Let's get on home, she said. We have a war to win. They made their way back up the mountain under the cover of night. Maggie held on tight around his waist, with her cheek pressed firmly to his back. She could feel the steady beat of his heart right through his shirt. It was a strong and even rhythm now, the heartbeat of a man who was no longer fighting his battles all by himself. Inside the cabin, Caleb threw the bolt on the door, loaded each and every weapon, and then lined them up against the wall. Maggie filled up the canteens, packed fresh bandages, and baked a batch of biscuits big enough to feed all the homesteaders come morning. They moved around each other without a word. But this was not their old silence, that cold, distant quiet of two strangers just sharing a space. This was a new kind of silence, the kind shared between two people who moved as one, who knew what the other needed without a single question, and who filled in the spaces the other left open. It was the silence of a true partnership. Close to midnight, Maggie was at the table rolling bandages. Caleb was sitting on the other side, cleaning his rifle for the third time. Caleb, if we make it through tomorrow. She paused, and when she looked at him, his pale eyes were fixed on her. When, she said, correcting herself. A warmth spread through her chest. When we make it through tomorrow, I need you to do something for me. What is that? Build a second chair for this table. A proper one, not that stool you dragged over from the corner. He set the rifle down, his gaze shifting from the table to the stool, and then back to her. I will build you a chair, he said in a low voice. And a porch to set it on, and a garden too, if you would like one. I would like one. Then you will have it. He reached over the table, his hand covering hers. His thumb gently brushed over the calluses on her palm. They were the marks of a woman who had spent her entire life working hard without ever hearing a word of thanks for it. Maggie Hollowell. Maggie Drummond, she corrected him. He had to swallow hard before he could speak her new name. Maggie Drummond? Maggie, when all this is over, I'm going to spend every last minute I have left making sure you never feel like you are cast aside again. Her eyes started to well up. She did not try to stop it or hide it. She just let the tears come as she gripped his hand even tighter. That is the most I have ever heard you say all at once, she whispered. Do not get used to it. Too late. Outside, the mountains stood waiting. Dawn was on its way. Dutch was on his way. The biggest fight of their lives was only hours from now, but in that little rough-hewn cabin, two souls who had spent their lives being broken just sat across from one another at a table with mismatched seats. They held on to each other as if the whole world depended on it. And for them, it truly did. They were gone from the cabin long before sunrise. Maggie held the short rifle, the very one Caleb had handed her the night he first taught her how to shoot. It felt different in her hands this time. It was not heavy or unfamiliar anymore, but a part of her. It was like the calluses on her hands and the iron in her spine, things she had earned for herself. Caleb walked out in front, his long legs covering the trail with ease, but every so often he would look back. It was not to see if she was keeping pace, but just to make sure she was still there. She was. Down at the base of the mountain, Hank was waiting with the horses. His face looked tired, and his crooked hat was pulled down low. The Granger boys are set up on the East Ridge. Tom Morrison and two of his hands have the high ground overlooking the valley road. Anna is holding down the store with the women and children. And Dutch? Caleb asked. Broke camp about an hour ago. He is heading north straight for the Granger place, all 7 of them. Then we need to move now. Caleb swung himself onto his horse and pulled Maggie up right behind him. She put her arms around his middle, the rifle pressed between their bodies. Maggie, he said, his eyes still facing forward. Yeah. When the bullets start flying, you find cover. No arguments. Just one argument. What? I love you. His entire body went rigid. She felt it all, the sudden freeze, the shock, and the way his breath caught in his lungs like a horse reined in hard at the edge of a cliff. You picked now to tell me that? His voice was gravelly. I might not get another chance. You will get plenty of chances. Then you will hear it plenty of times. Now ride. He spurred the horse on, and they galloped down the road that cut through the valley. The Granger homestead was situated in a large clearing where the river made a wide turn. Jake and Emmett had put it up with their father just 2 years earlier. It was a sturdy house with a good barn on land that was worth making a stand for. Dutch knew it too. The men from the railroad had already put it on their survey maps. It was prime land, worth more money than the Grangers would ever see in their lives. Caleb stopped them behind a ridge that looked down on the property. Down below, a cloud of dust was rising from the south. Dutch's men were riding in hard, spreading out in a loose formation with rifles laid across their saddles. Tom Morrison's voice drifted down from his spot up high. "I am counting 7. Dutch is out front." Caleb lifted his hand. All along the ridgeline, the homesteaders got themselves ready. There were 12 men and women in all, spread out over a quarter-mile of high ground. They were not soldiers, just farmers and shopkeepers, scared folks who had decided that being scared together was a whole lot better than being scared all alone. "Nobody takes a shot till I do," Caleb called out. "And nobody aims to kill unless they are aiming to kill us first. We are giving them a chance to ride on out. And if they do not take it," Jake Granger's voice came from behind a pile of rocks, his rifle held steady, "then may God have mercy on us for what we have to do next." Dutch's crew rode into the clearing and reined in their horses. 7 riders sat in a raggedy line, all of them armed, filthy, and looking mean. Dutch was on his horse right in the middle of them, his old Confederate hat tipped back. His eyes swept over the homestead like he was already measuring it for curtains. "Granger," Dutch hollered, "I am here to give you that offer one last time. Sell me this land. I will give you a fair price. You can ride away from here with your family all in one piece." Not a sound came from the house. Dutch let out a long, dramatic sigh. "Have it your own way, then." He motioned for 2 of his men to ride forward. Caleb stood up tall on the ridge. His voice came rolling down that slope like an avalanche. "That is far enough, Dutch." Every single rider's head shot up. Dutch's face soured when he spotted Caleb on the ridge. Then his eyes darted from left to right, counting all the rifles that were now pointed down at him from every direction. "Well now," Dutch said, a tight smile on his face. "Looks like the mountain man brought some friends. That is a new one." "This is your last chance," Caleb said. "Turn your horses around, ride south, and do not ever come back." Dutch's hand came to rest on the handle of his pistol. His men started to shift in their saddles, getting jumpy. Even their horses could feel the tension in the air. 7 against 12 were not good odds, especially when the other side had the high ground. But Dutch Garrett was never a man who cared much about odds. He was always a man who cared about cruelty. "You know something, Drummond?" Dutch yelled, his voice carrying sharp and clear in the morning air. "I have been doing some thinking about that wife of yours. Maggie, is it? The big one. The mail-order bride that nobody else wanted." He let his words hang there, hoping they would sink in deep. "I have been wondering just what is going to happen to her after you are dead. Because you and I both know how this story ends. It ended the same way the day I took Ellen from you. You put up a fight, you lose, and the woman you love walks away with a stronger man." Maggie's blood began to boil. She was crouched down behind the ridge, just 10 paces from Caleb, her rifle up and her jaw clenched tight. Every single word that came out of Dutch's mouth was designed to tear Caleb apart, to poke at the old wound that had never truly healed. It was meant to turn the soldier back into that broken man who stumbled home to find an empty house. She watched Caleb's face, saw that old hurt flicker in his eyes, and saw his hand tighten its grip on his rifle. And then she saw something she had never seen there before. She saw him let it all go. "Ellen did not walk away with a stronger man," Caleb said, his voice as solid as the mountain beneath him. "She walked away with a weaker one, and she paid for it with her life. That is not my burden to carry anymore, Dutch. I have been carrying it for 10 years. I am done." Dutch's smile faltered. "You want to know about my wife?" Caleb went on. My wife is the one who threw a bucket of water in your face and did not even blink. My wife is the one who taught this whole valley how to stand up when you tried to push it down. My wife is the reason you are looking up at 12 rifles instead of just one. So if you want to sit here and talk about who is stronger, you are looking at the wrong Drummond. Maggie's throat felt tight. Her eyes clouded over. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, and held onto her rifle even tighter. Dutch's face turned a deep shade of red. The mask he wore, the one of being in control, finally slipped. Underneath it was the same ugly anger she had seen back at the creek. It was the rage of a man who could not bear being bested by someone he thought was beneath him. "Kill them," Dutch hissed at his men. Two things happened at the exact same time. The fastest of Dutch's riders raised his rifle and fired toward the ridge. The bullet slammed into the rock just 3 feet from where Caleb was standing. Caleb did not even flinch. He fired back a single, clean shot that hit the man in the shoulder and sent him spinning off his horse. Then the whole mountain seemed to explode. Gunshots came from every direction. The homesteaders rained fire down from the high ground, the sound of their shots echoing through the clearing. Dutch's men broke apart, their horses bucking and rearing as all their discipline vanished. Jake Granger shot another man's rifle clean out of his hands. Tom Morrison, cracked ribs and all, fired from his perch up on the bluff and brought a horse down. The rider hit the ground and started to crawl for cover, and he was bleeding. Maggie laid her cheek against the rifle stock, aimed at a rider making a run for the Granger house, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit his saddle, close enough to do the job. The horse reared up, threw the man, and took off into the woods. "Good shot," Caleb yelled without even looking her way. "Do it again." Her hands were shaking, but she reloaded and fired one more time. This time, she hit a fence post. It was not a man or a horse, but the crack of that bullet was enough to make another rider turn tail and run. Dutch fought like a cornered animal. He fired from his horse, spinning the animal in tight circles, shouting orders that his men could not possibly hear over all the shooting. 2 of his riders lost their nerve and ran, galloping south for all they were worth. A third man threw his rifle down and put his hands in the air. That left 4 of them. It was Dutch and 3 of his men, all pinned down in the clearing with bullets raining down on them from the high ground. "It is over, Dutch," Caleb roared. "Tell your men to stand down." Dutch's reply was a bullet that ripped through Caleb's sleeve and scraped his arm. Blood sprayed out. Caleb grunted, switched his rifle to his other shoulder, and kept right on shooting. Maggie saw the blood. Her stomach felt like it fell through the floor. "Caleb, I am fine. You stay down." She did not stay down. She crawled along the ridge to where he was, pulled the bandana from her neck, and tied it tight around his arm while bullets kicked up dirt all around them. "I told you to stay down," he growled. "And I told you that I love you. So I guess we are both just ignoring each other today." He stared at her, bleeding, furious, and scared to death for her. And then something in his expression broke open like the sky after a bad storm. Down below them, Dutch's last 3 men threw down their rifles. One by one, their hands went up. The horses stamped and snorted. The gunfire sputtered out and then died completely. Only Dutch was still on his horse. His pistol was empty. He had lost his hat. Blood trickled from a cut over his eye where a piece of rock had hit him. He just sat there on his horse in the middle of the clearing, surrounded, outgunned, and completely alone. Caleb stood up on the ridge, his wounded arm hanging limp, blood soaking through the bandana. "It is done, Dutch." Dutch looked up at him. The rage was still burning in his eyes, but there was something else underneath it. It was the hollow look of a man who had finally run out of road. "You think this makes you a hero?" Dutch spat. "You think these people are going to remember you? You are still just the same broken hermit on a mountain. A few bullets do not change who you are." Caleb started climbing down the ridge. Maggie reached for his arm, but he just shook his head. "Stay here. Caleb, please." That single word, "please," stopped her cold. He had never said it to her before. She let him go. Caleb walked into the clearing, heading straight for Dutch. Up on that ridge, every rifle was trained on him, just waiting for the word, but Caleb gave a little wave to hold their fire. This business was just for 2 men and a whole decade's worth of bad blood. He walked right up and stopped about 3 feet from Dutch's horse. He looked up at the man who stole his wife, who put a knife to his face, the very ghost that had walked through his nightmares for 10 long years. "You know, you're right," Caleb said, his voice low. "A couple of bullets won't change the man I am." But she sure did. A nasty look came over Dutch's face. "She'll run out on you. They all do. That might be, but that's a matter for me and her to sort out. It has got nothing to do with you, not ever again." He took a step back. "Now get off my mountain, Dutch. I am not going to ask you twice." For a heart-stopping second, Dutch's hand floated right near his belt, where he had another pistol tucked away out of sight. Maggie saw it plain as day from her spot up on the ridge. Her rifle lifted smooth and steady, the sight landing right on Dutch's chest. "Don't you do it," she whispered to the wind. "Please don't make me pull this trigger." Dutch's gaze shot up to the ridge. He found her, saw that rifle, and saw the woman holding it. She was not shaken, was not crying, and she sure was not running. She was aiming. His hand fell away from his belt. He reined his horse around real slow and rode on out of that clearing without saying another thing. His men, all without their guns and looking beat down to the bone, just stumbled along behind him. They vanished down that valley road, and the trail dust just ate them up. Everything in the clearing got real still. Then Jake Granger let out a holler that bounced off every rock and canyon wall. Emmett joined right in, and even Tom Morrison lowered his rifle and just leaned back against a boulder, half wincing and half laughing. Still breathing. Maggie came scrambling down that ridge, moving fast, a mix of running and sliding with her rifle thumping at her side. She got to Caleb and took hold of his hurt arm. "Let me have a look at that. It is nothing but a scratch, you and your scratches. One of these days a cougar is going to take your head clean off and you'll still be calling it a scratch." "Reckon so." She carefully untied the bandana to look at the wound. It was shallow and bloody, but it looked clean enough. She tied it back on, tighter this time, her fingers starting to shake now that the fight was over. "You just had to walk down there all by yourself," she said, keeping her eyes on the knot. "After all our talk about doing things together, well, some things a man's just got to handle face to face. What about that hidden gun?" "I saw it, Caleb. He was about to draw on you." Caleb looked right at her, but he did not. "Did? Because you had that rifle on him." "I know." His good hand came up and gently held her face. "I know you did. Then you have to stop walking into trouble by yourself." "I mean it, Caleb. I cannot do this." Her voice started to break. She pressed her lips into a thin line, trying to get a hold of herself. "I cannot lose the only good thing I have ever had just because you are too proud to let somebody watch your back." He pulled her close then, wrapping both his arms around her, even with the hurt one, and held her right up against his chest, so close she could feel his heart pounding. It was beating fast and strong. He was alive. "You are not going to lose me," he said into her hair. Into her hair. "I swear I will. You ought not to make promises you can't keep. I have kept every single promise I ever made, Maggie. I just never met a soul worth making them to before." And just like that, she gave way. It was not a shattering kind of break, not weakness, but like hard-packed earth cracking in the spring to let new life push on through. She wept against his chest, and he just held her close, and neither of them spoke a word for a good long while. The homesteaders started gathering in the clearing. Somebody brought a bucket of water. Somebody else brought a bottle of whiskey. Tom Morrison took Caleb's good hand and shook it firm. He said, "I surely had you figured wrong, Drummond." "No, you did not," Caleb said. "I was everything you thought I was. A hermit, a loner, not a man to be trusted." He looked right at Maggie. "Someone just came along and changed the whole equation." Ruth Morrison pulled Maggie into a hug so tight it nearly sent her tumbling. "Thank you," Ruth whispered low, "for convincing him to come down off that mountain." I did not make him do a thing, Maggie told her. He just needed a good reason. Anna Pierce rolled up from town in her wagon, all loaded down with bandages and food. She took one long look at Caleb's arm, at Maggie's tear-streaked face, and at the spent shells scattered in the dirt, and she just shook her head. You two are going to put the gray in my hair. You already have gray hair, Anna, and now I understand why. That afternoon, Hank Beaumont drove his coach up the valley road for the first time in weeks without peeking over his shoulder. He saw Caleb and Maggie sitting quiet on the Greer's porch steps. Caleb's arm was all bandaged up and Maggie was leaned against his good shoulder. They were both still and peaceful, the way folks get when they have been through something that changes them for good. Hank tipped his hat. Well, I'll be. 8 brides. It took 8 tries, but you finally got one who was crazy enough to stick around. She is not crazy, Caleb said. I am a little bit crazy, Maggie admitted with a small smile. She is a little bit crazy, Caleb agreed. Hank let out a big laugh. I drove every last one of those women up this mountain, and every single one of them turned tail and ran. You are the first one I will not have to drive back home. This is my home, Maggie said. And she meant it with a certainty she had never felt about anything before. They rode back up this mountain while the sun was sinking low. Caleb's arm throbbed with a dull ache. Maggie's muscles felt like they were on fire. They were bruised and bloodied and tired down to the bone. But when their cabin came into view, standing solid and waiting, a kind of peace settled deep inside them both. Caleb swung down from his horse first and then helped Maggie down. His hand stayed on her waist a second longer than they had to. I am going to build that other chair, he said. Not tonight. Right now you have only got one good arm. I have built plenty of things with less. He picked up the axe, found a solid piece of cedar from the woodpile, and got right to work. Maggie sat on the porch step and just watched him. His swings were a bit slower than usual. You could see the wound pulled at him with every motion, but he did not stop. He did not complain. He just shaped that wood with the same steady patience he applied to everything else. An hour later, he set a chair down on the porch right next to the door. It was rough-hewn and uneven, built by a one-armed man in the fading daylight. It was the most beautiful thing Maggie had ever laid her eyes on. Sit down, he said. She sat. The chair held her just fine. Caleb stood over her, with sawdust in his beard and blood on his bandage, and those pale eyes she once thought were cold now burned with something that looked a whole lot like joy. There, he said. Now there are 2. Maggie reached up, grabbed a fistful of his shirt, and pulled him down to her. She kissed him hard, tasting salt and cedar and the faint copper of blood. He braced himself on the chair with his good arm and kissed her back like a starving man who had finally been given bread. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Maggie Drummond. Caleb Drummond. I love you. 3 words, said for the very first time. They were rough and cracked and imperfect, just like the man they came from, but they were real. They were more real than anything either of them had ever been. Given. Took you long enough, she whispered back. I am a slow learner. Well, it is a good thing I am a patient teacher. You are the least patient woman I have ever known. Then I suppose you just bring out the best in me. He gently pulled her up from the chair and wrapped his arms all the way around her. They stood there on the porch of that rugged cabin on the mountain, the place where 7 other brides had come and gone, where a broken soldier had tried to hide from the whole world, and where a woman nobody wanted had planted her feet and flat out refused to move. Down below them, the valley stretched out wide and green. The river was catching the last bit of daylight. Smoke trailed up from the chimneys of homesteads that were still standing, because plain, ordinary folks had decided to stand together. Maggie leaned her head against Caleb's chest. What happens now? Now we live, he said. We will chop wood and we will make coffee, and we will argue about every little thing, and we will build this place into something worth keeping. That sounds like a whole lot of work. Are you scared of work? I have never been scared of work, Caleb. I have only ever been scared of doing it all by myself. He held her just a little bit tighter. Then you have got nothing left to be scared of anymore. And right there on that mountain, as the day gave way to dusk and the first stars began to show, Caleb Drummond held the woman who had saved him from himself and made a silent promise. He would spend every single morning for the rest of his days making sure there were 2 cups of coffee on the table, 2 chairs sitting on the porch, and a door that was always, always unlocked. Because Margaret Drummond, the woman they all said was too big, too loud, and just too much, had walked up his mountain carrying nothing but a heart like a flour sack and bones made of pure iron. And she had gone and done what no army, no blizzard, and no 7 brides before her ever could. She had made that mountain man believe he was worth staying for. And then she had stayed.